Welcome back to Two Robots Talking. Today we're going deep on the FBI vault on Adrian Lamo, a figure who really kind of blurred the lines between hacker and informant. In the world of cybersecurity,
Yeah.
you've probably heard of some of his targets.
Oh, yeah.
Big names, the New York Times, Yahoo.
Even Microsoft.
But it was his online conversations with Chelsea Manning, the Army intelligence analyst who leaked those classified documents to WikiLeaks. That really put Lamo in the spotlight.
Yeah.
And then there's the mystery surrounding his death at just 37. Not long after he'd expressed fears for his own safety.
Well, and what's so fascinating about this is the FBI just released their files on Lamo. Pages and pages of documents, photos, a lot of it's redacted, but
Yeah.
it's like we're getting a glimpse into some crazy spy thriller.
Yeah.
This life lived on the edge of the digital world. And the real one.
Okay, so we've got this treasure trove of information, but like you said, a lot of it is blacked out. So what's our mission for this deep dive? What can we realistically piece together about Adrian Lamo from what we have here?
Well, I think we can focus on three key areas. First, understanding what Lamo was actually doing. What systems did he access? How did he do it? Second, his relationship with the FBI. Was he a willing informant, or was there some pressure involved? And finally, trying to shed light on the circumstances surrounding his death. Were his fears real, or was there something else going on?
Right, because that's the big question. Just how much danger was Lamo really in? Let's start with those early hacking exploits. I mean, this guy was called the homeless hacker, living this nomadic lifestyle, breaking into some of the biggest companies in the world. That's a story in itself, right?
Absolutely. And what's interesting is the FBI file actually confirms that Lamo was already on their radar pretty early on. There's a document in here that mentions an interview they did with him when he was only 17 years old
Okay.
about unauthorized access to computer systems.
17. So he's already making waves while most kids are worried about getting their driver's license. What kind of systems was he targeting back then?
Well, that's the thing. The specifics of those early targets are redacted. But there's a note from an agent that describes Lamo as a computer prodigy. They really emphasize his self-taught programming skills. It seems like even then they recognized his potential as a threat, but also possibly as an asset.
So he has this incredible talent,
Yeah.
but he chooses to use it for, let's call it, unauthorized exploration, rather than, say, building some kind of tech empire or something.
Yeah.
Do we get any insight at all into his motivations at that young age?
There are some hints. A few documents mention some early psychological evaluations, referencing diagnoses of Asperger's syndrome and depression. Now, it's really important to remember, we can't oversimplify or draw a direct line between diagnoses and actions, but it does add another layer of complexity to understanding his choices.
It makes you think about the different ways people see the world, how a mind wired differently might approach problems, or in Lamo's case, security systems, in a way that most of us wouldn't even consider.
Exactly. And what's even more intriguing is that there's a reference to Lamo actually providing information to the FBI on a matter of national security back in 2000. Now the details are completely blacked out, but it suggests that his relationship with them wasn't just them monitoring him. There was some level of collaboration even then.
So here he is, a teenager, potentially involved in matters of national security, while simultaneously hacking into who knows what. It sounds like the start of a spy thriller, not a real-life story.
It really does, and it raises so many questions. What kind of information did he provide? Was he coerced? Or did he see himself as serving some greater good? Was this the beginning of a pattern that would define his life, this back and forth between the world of hacking and the world of government agencies?
And it gets even more complex when you consider his later actions. Particularly with Chelsea Manning and WikiLeaks, that's when things get really controversial.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we get into that, let's take a closer look at some of those high-profile hacks. Because it wasn't just about breaking in. Lamo's methods, especially his reliance on social engineering, offer some insights into the human element of cybersecurity that are still relevant today.
Okay, let's do it.
Welcome back to Two Robots Talking. Before we were discussing Adrian Lamo's early life, and that mystery surrounding his relationship with the FBI at such a young age.
Yeah. It's pretty wild to think about him navigating all that as a teenager. But let's get into some of his actual hacking exploits. Because it wasn't just about targeting these big names, right? His methods were kind of unique.
Yeah, they were very interesting. In the New York Times intrusion, for example, he didn't use some kind of, sophisticated hacking software or anything. He found weaknesses in their public website and then used what's called social engineering to get deeper into their systems.
Social engineering, so basically tricking people into giving you access.
Exactly. In this case, he posed as an expert, built up some trust, and then gained access that he shouldn't have had.
So he was a hacker,
Yeah.
but also a bit of a con man.
You could say that, yeah. In fact, the FBI files actually highlight his charisma and how easily he could convince people to trust him. It really drives home this point that's still so relevant today, even with all the fancy firewalls. Human error is still a huge vulnerability when it comes to cybersecurity.
Okay, that's a little unsettling, but it makes sense. So what about his other big targets? Yahoo, Microsoft. Did he use some more tactics there?
The files are a little vague on the specifics, but there is this recurring theme of him leveraging insider access, whether it was through manipulation or exploiting oversights in the system. It wasn't like brute force hacking. It was more about understanding how to kind of bypass the security measures.
Almost like he was playing a game, finding the loopholes in the system. But these weren't harmless pranks, right? What were the real-world consequences of these intrusions?
Well, the consequences varied. With the New York Times, he added himself to a list of expert sources, more mischievous than malicious, you could say. But with Yahoo, he reportedly accessed and modified source code. And that's significantly more serious.
Yeah, no kidding. And those are just the ones we know about. The FBI files mentioned investigations by other agencies too, like the Secret Service, the Department of Defense. This wasn't just some kid messing around in his basement.
No, not at all. Lamo was operating on a level that attracted some very serious attention, which raises the question, with all of this activity, why wasn't he stopped sooner?
Well, that goes back to his relationship with the FBI, right?
Right.
Were they turning a blind eye to some of this? Maybe even using him for their own purposes?
It's tough to say for sure. The files are heavily redacted when it comes to his interactions with them. There are mentions of him offering information, expressing concerns for his safety, even requesting their help at one point.
Like requesting help. What kind of help?
That part is blacked out, unfortunately. But it's clear that his relationship with the FBI was complicated. He was both a subject of investigation and a source of information, walking this fine line between cooperation and defiance.
Okay, so we've got this enigmatic hacker living a nomadic life, breaking into these major systems, and seemingly playing both sides with the FBI. It's a story that almost begs for a Hollywood adaptation.
Right. But remember, amidst all the intrigue, there was a real person at the center of this. And perhaps the most humanizing aspect of these files is the glimpse we get into his struggles with mental health.
Right, you mentioned those early diagnoses. But that was years before his most high-profile actions, including his involvement with Chelsea Manning. Do the FBI files shed any light on his mental state during that period?
There are a few scattered notes. One agent describes him as intense and paranoid during an interview. There's also a mention of him being hospitalized for a psych evaluation after an incident where he allegedly damaged property at a news organization he'd previously hacked.
So there were definitely some signs that he was struggling. Did the FBI take that into account when dealing with him? Especially given their history.
It's hard to say. The files don't really go into those ethical considerations, but it's a valid question. To what extent did they recognize his vulnerabilities and maybe even exploit them?
This is where things get really ethically murky. We're talking about a young man with documented mental health challenges, caught in this web of hacking, government agencies, and high-stakes leaks. It's hard not to feel some sympathy for her.
Absolutely. And it makes his involvement in the Chelsea Manning case all the more complex and tragic, because that's when Lamo's life and his legacy took a truly dramatic turn.
Welcome back to Two Robots Talking. We've been digging into the life and FBI file of Adrian Lamo, a figure who continues to spark so much debate, even years after his death.
Yeah, and I think in this last part, we need to address the elephant in the room, the Chelsea Manning case, and how Lamo's actions back then really continue to color his legacy today.
All right, because this is where things get really messy, ethically speaking. You have Manning, this Army intelligence analyst, leaking all these classified documents to WikiLeaks, which sparked this huge international controversy. And then you have Lamo, this hacker with this really complicated past. Entering the picture, what do the FBI files tell us about how that all played out?
Well, the files themselves are heavily redacted. When it comes to the specifics of the Manning leaks, what we do see is confirmation that Lamo was communicating with Manning online. He became aware of the leaked material and ultimately made the decision to inform the authorities.
Yeah, I remember this case just blowing up in the media. There were such strong opinions on both sides. Some people saw Lamo as a traitor to the hacker community. Others believed he did the right thing by reporting this potential security threat.
Exactly, and the FBI files, while they don't really take a side, they do offer some insight into Lamo's thinking at the time. There's a quote from an interview where he expresses concern. about the potential harm that the leaked information could cause. He said he felt a responsibility to act.
But it's not that simple, is it? We have to factor in Lamo's own history, his relationship with the FBI,
Yeah.
and the possibility that his actions were influenced by factors beyond just a sense of duty.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where those redactions are so frustrating. We see mentions of Lamo meeting with FBI agents, discussing the case. But the details of those conversations are blacked out. Did they pressure him? Did they promise him something in return for his cooperation? We just don't know.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But even with those gaps, I think this case raises some really big questions about the ethics of hacking, whistleblowing, and the role of these government agencies in all of this.
You're right. You're hitting on something really crucial here. Lamo's story isn't just about him. It reflects these larger tensions that exist within the digital world. The lines between right and wrong, legal and illegal, they can be so blurry. And it forces us to ask, what happens when those lines intersect with personal beliefs, mental health struggles, and the influence of these really powerful institutions?
And those are questions that are more relevant than ever today. We live in a world where data breaches are constant, online privacy, government surveillance. These are all major concerns. Lamo's story, while unique, speaks to these broader challenges we all face in this digital landscape.
Exactly. And I think one of the most important takeaways from this whole deep dive is the importance of critical thinking. Don't just accept information at face value, especially when it comes to stories like Lamo's that are so shrouded in mystery and conflicting narratives.
Right. Question everything. Dig deeper. Look for those missing puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
And try to understand the motivations and complexities at play. Because that's how we learn from the past.
Right.
And hopefully make better choices in the future.
Well said. And as we wrap up this exploration of Adrian Lamo's FBI file, I think it's important to just acknowledge the unanswered questions, those lingering uncertainties. His death at such a young age, with no official cause ever determined, adds another layer of tragedy and intrigue to all of this.
Yeah, you see hints of his paranoia in the files, his fear of these powerful enemies. But ultimately, we're left with more questions than answers.
And perhaps that's the most fitting ending. To a story as complex and contradictory as Adrian Lamo's, this life lived on the edge of the digital world, pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and provoke.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the FBI vault here on Two Robots Talking. Until next time, stay curious.